Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 20606 in the name of Monica Lennon on the Ecocide Scotland Bill at stage 1. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Monica Lennon, the member in charge, to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I begin by declaring a financial interest as listed in my register, as I have received benefit-in-kind support from Stop Ecocide International Limited. Today, we have a historic opportunity to join a global movement and take the first step towards introducing ecocide law in Scotland. This bill recognises a simple truth. The most egregious acts of environmental destruction must be treated as the serious crimes they are. Scotland must be more ambitious. The aim of this bill is to prevent mass environmental destruction by introducing severe penalties, including a new offence under criminal law. This is a deterrent designed to change corporate culture and send an unmistakable signal. Scotland values our nature above illegal profit. There is a growing international recognition that existing laws are insufficient to protect our planet. This bill has received wide-ranging support from the public, from businesses, workers and experts, echoing a trend seen in Belgium, France and far beyond. I am deeply inspired by the work of Polly Higgins, the late Scottish lawyer and environmentalist. Polly understood that to protect nature, we must change the rules. By criminalising ecocide, Scotland shows solidarity with those nations most affected by climate change and biodiversity loss. As Polly once said, this is a, quote, simple law to protect the earth, unquote. I agree, it is a necessary guardrail for our fragile planet, not just globally, but also locally. 2026 is the year of green activity recently launched by Unison to underscore the movement of workers who demand greener and safeguarded workplaces and communities to live in. Today is the culmination of Stage 1 scrutiny. I thank the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee and other committees involved for their diligent work. I'm encouraged by the cross-party support for strengthening environmental law. I also warmly welcome the Scottish Government's support for the general principles of this bill. I acknowledge the committee's concerns regarding the limited time left in this parliamentary session. To that end, my bill officials and I have been working intensively with the Scottish Government to draft amendments that address the themes raised during the evidence sessions. We are committed to consulting key stakeholders to ensure their expertise fully informs Stage 2. Turning to the offence, the bill defines ecocide as causing severe environmental harm that is either reckless or intentional. Severe means harm that is either widespread or long-term. Critically, this bill allows for both individuals and organisations to be convicted. Penalties are significant. Individuals could face up to 20 years in prison, and for organisations, there is no limit on fines. Furthermore, the courts will be empowered to require compensation to repair or mitigate the damage caused. I want to be very clear today on 2 points raised during scrutiny. First of all, on permits. This bill will not criminalise legitimate licensed activities. It is not designed to target businesses operating responsibly under current regulations or impact planning decisions. Think of it as a regulatory pyramid with ecocide law overarching at the top. And in terms of the existing law that we have in Scotland, some have asked if we can simply amend the Regulatory Reform Act of 2014. I don't believe this is sufficient. The 2014 Act deals with strict liability. Ecocide requires a standalone crime with a high threshold and corresponding penalties. Last month, the UK Government published a national security assessment identifying ecosystem collapse as a direct threat to security and prosperity. The report produced by the UK intelligence community adds to the evidence base of the need to have an apex environmental law. But as I'll probably turn to more detail in my closing remarks, I'll respond to questions that colleagues have today about particular suggestions for amendments. But, Presiding Officer, our purpose today is not to resolve every technical detail, but to agree on the general principles of the bill so we may proceed to stage 2. The committee's main concern was time, not principle. I can reassure the Chamber that the work to address those concerns is well underway, for which I am extremely grateful to the Cabinet Secretary, her officials and the Non-Government Bills Unit. To allow this work to continue at pace tomorrow, we can say yes today and take this urgent step toward preventing environmental destruction for generations to come, and I am glad to move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. I now call on Edward Mountain on behalf of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I'd like to congratulate Monica Lennon for bringing forward this bill. I know she's put a huge amount of work into it, and we've had a really good discussion at stage 1. I'd like to thank all of those who engaged with the committee during our scrutiny, and particularly the committee members and our clerks for their hard work and diligence during the process. Now, the committee agreed from the start, Presiding Officer, that this was a debate worth having. There is a case to be made for strengthening the law. We heard views that the current legal framework lacks an apex offence for serious environmental damage, with penalties to match. We heard about the potential deterrent effect the new offence may create and how it might influence corporate behaviour for the good, even if prosecutions are rare. And we heard views that this would be one way, not necessarily the only way, for keeping pace with revised European law. But the committee also found two things. First, the evidence as to whether there is much of a gap in the law is finely balanced. Regulators and prosecutors told us that the existing powers, particularly Section 40 of the Regulatory Reform Act 2014, appear to be more than capable of addressing quite serious harm. They struggled to identify examples of cases that clearly would have been met by the proposed Ecocide threshold. Secondly, and even more importantly, our scrutiny found significant concerns with the bill about the clarity and the workability of key definitions like severe environmental harm, widespread and serious adverse effects. Prosecutors and regulators emphasised the importance of legal certainty, especially if it could mean a huge fine or a long spell in prison. Some of the current drafting raised doubts and whether they had the certainty that was required. Another concern was about the unintended consequences, and I refer to the potential deterrent effect as an argument for the bill. It could affect risk appetite, but there is another side of the coin. The bill does not provide a defence of carrying out permitted activities or exercising lawful functions, like approving a planning application. We heard serious concerns about this. We heard the bill could have a chilling effect on decision makers. And then there's the practical challenges of enforcement, like establishing the thought process in complex corporate cases, getting the detail of employer liability right, and allowing alternative convictions if the jury is not persuaded the conduct was bad enough to justify ecocide. There is also the fact of the current Section 40 offence having barely been used at all. Why? That needs to be looked at. Now, Presiding Officer, if the Parliament agrees to the general principles, these issues are not going to go away. The committee was not unanimous on the general principles, but we did agree, all of us, that if the bill reaches stage 2, there was going to be need to be evidence on these matters, including views on the wording of the proposed amendments from experts. Most of us doubted there was sufficient time left to get this right and ensure that we had a robust, workable law on the statute book. And so, Presiding Officer, it is fair to say I'm concerned about where we go from here. Presiding Officer, there are two bits of unsolicited advice that I give to the next Parliament from somebody who won't be here in May next year. First, please let's not have members' bills on complex, controversial issues introduced so late in the parliamentary session. It's unfair on the member in charge and it's unfair on the committee. It is not where to start from if we want to make good law. Secondly, let's not have another Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee with its near impossible remit, far too wide, far too diverse and far too many issues to keep on top of. At a point, Presiding Officer, when some committees and other committees might be winding down, we are busier as a committee than ever, with the scrutiny of the climate change plan coming to a head, loads of important subordinate legislation and an LCM on other matters, and the latest issues on ferries, to mention nothing about the railways bill. Let me be clear, Presiding Officer. If the bill proceeds, I will of course respect the will of the Parliament and to try to achieve whatever deadlines are set. But I do also, Presiding Officer, want to be crystal clear that it will be a serious challenge to scrutinise the bill in the time remaining, to make good law and to make sure it's effective. And personally, Presiding Officer, I don't believe it's one that we can achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. I now call on Gillian Martin, Cabinet Secretary, to open on behalf of the Scottish Government. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this debate on Monica Lennon's Ecocide Scotland Bill at Stage 1. The protection of our natural environment is essential, and as such, it's an important priority for the Scottish Government. Of course, last week Parliament passed the Natural Environment Bill, which strengthens the law in important areas for the first time, providing a framework for statutory targets. And the Scottish Government has supported the general proposal to introduce an offence of ecocide for the most extreme, willful and reckless cases of harm. And the new offence should be understood as something new, standing above the existing offences relating to environmental damage. This is a particular type of new offence, not designed to address behaviours that are regularly occurring. Rather, it's an offence that is designed for the most serious actions, those that we, at the very least would not expect to occur more once in a generation, but offences that we hope never occur. However, these actions would have to be so serious that there needs to be a commensurate legal provision to match them. Indeed, it's hoped that the existence of an ecocide offence in the statute book would help to further discourage the instance of any extreme and, thankfully, very rare serious incidents. And through the development of the bill, and I've had useful and positive discussions with Monica Lennon, who came to me relatively early in her decision to lodge her proposals, and she has developed her thinking on an ecocide offence. And I'm aware that the public consultation that was carried out by Monica Lennon on her developing the proposal received wide public support, and many environmental organisations have supported the development of the bill. And I've been very clear throughout this process that the bill as drafted does have some flaws, some significant flaws. And in particular, I've raised concerns about the point of incompatibility with the ECHR and the interaction with permitting systems and the reporting duty. And the NZEC Committee Stage 1 report is admirably thorough in setting out the concerns, not just the concerns that I've raised at Stage 1, but also their own concerns and the issues that were raised in evidence. And the committee makes a range of recommendations, many of which seek reassurance on concerns from the member in charge, or the Scottish Government, or both. And although the committee remains positive about a new higher-level environmental offence, the conclusion of a majority of the committee is that they do not see a realistic prospect of the concerns being addressed before this session of Parliament ends, notwithstanding what the convener has just said. And on that basis, they recommend the bill should not proceed any further. And I do want to put on record, I've considered the committee's report very carefully. As I've already set out to the committee, there are areas in where I think the bill merits amendment. I've said that from the get-go, that we are already well prepared on these issues. We have been working on amendments, potential amendments, should the bill proceed. We're in regular conversation with Ms Lennon on that. But I do think the remaining issues raised by the committee must be adequately considered by Ms Lennon ahead of stage 3, and of course she will no doubt address some of the convener's comments in her closing statement. But on that basis, the Scottish Government will continue to support the general principles of the bill in today's debate, and I and my officials will continue to work with Ms Lennon and the Non-Government Bills Unit to ensure that we can support the committee's consideration of this bill at stage 2. I want to turn to a couple of specific issues that were raised by the committee report. The report discusses the overlaps between the proposed new Ecocide offence and the Section 40 offence of causing significant environmental harm in the Regulatory Reform Act of 2014. And this is an issue which has been considered throughout stage 1, including in the Scottish Government's memorandum in the evidence that I gave to the committee. As I've said, I think it's important that the bill and the new offence of ecocide offer something additional to that body of existing environmental law. Further clarity is required on whether the interaction between the offences should be reflected in the bill itself, and a review of Section 40 offence itself may be appropriate in the future, although the scope of such a review would depend on Parliament's consideration of this bill, and that would be something for the next Parliament. Yes, I will.
Douglas Lumsden.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking an intervention. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the changes would have to be so substantial that it would only be right that the committee would then have to take more evidence on what the amendments could actually do to the bill?
Cabinet Secretary.
I absolutely respect what the convener has said in that regard. The convener is rightly pointed out, as the former convener of 2 committees myself, you make a judgment on behalf of the members of the committee about what additional evidence you might want to take. And of course that is absolutely a matter for the committee. And so I'll demur from giving my point of view on it, because really it is up to the committee to make that decision. The report discusses issues of potential impacts in the bill on the planning system and permitted activities, and I've given further thought to this issue and discussed with the Minister for Public Finance, Ivan McKee, following the evidence received by the committee from local authorities, and I'm well placed to bring forward amendments in stage 2. However, I'd be happy to work with any member who's similarly considering amendments in this space, including Ms Lennon, members of the committee or wider in the Parliament. Other issues raised by the Stage 1 report include issues of definition and the framing of the offence, the bill's treatment of cumulative harm, of emissions and, of course, of conduct. The report also makes some recommendations about the provision of guidance, and these are matters that were discussed during Stage 1 evidence gathering. And although the committee raises concerns that these issues are not fully resolved, I am confident that we can reach satisfactory positions to guide the consideration at stage 2. I think the willingness is there from the government. The willingness there is definitely there from Ms Lennon. She has stated that already, and I hope that other members will be involved in that, so should they wish, and engage with both of us. So in conclusion, I take seriously the concerns raised by the committee. I'm grateful, very grateful to the committee members for their consideration of the bill. I do have to say, I do agree with Edward Mountain. Someone took a member's bill through in the last Parliament.
Bring your remarks to
I started it very early, and it would be my advice as well as Mr Boughton to say, do it early, and then these issues will not arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I call in Douglas Lumsden to open on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, we've reached the crunch time of a parliamentary session when bills such as this one simply, I feel, do not have the time and space to be debated properly and implemented correctly. And I would like to start by paying tribute to the member in charge for her tireless work in this area, and I've enjoyed the conversations that we've had in committee and out with on the key parts of this bill, so I'd like to thank Monica Lennon for that. And I also know that many people in the North East will be putting their hopes on this bill when they see the environmental damage planned by companies like SSEM with their monster pylons and substations. And I thought that this bill would stop that damage, and I would vote for this bill. But projects that will cause damage on a huge scale, but the more evidence I've heard, the more I've came to the conclusion that this bill wouldn't stop that. And I have to question the example of substations. Who would be liable? Who would be responsible? Would it be companies like SSEN? Or if they had planning permission, would it be the planning authority? Would it be the councillors who grant the permission? Would it be the Scottish Government who set the planning framework? And I don't really feel all of those questions were answered. At committee, we wrestled with the question about permitted actions, and I don't think we had time to get to the bottom of it. The committee report on this bill also raised issues as the clarity of definitions on key terms within the bill, that they were insufficient, lay robust, using terms such as widespread and long-term. The committee also felt that the approach to those who were liable for ecocide was too narrow, as well as concerns around the compatibility with the ECHR. As a member of the committee, and having heard all this evidence, I am in agreement that this bill is not in a place where we can take it forward beyond stage 1. We already have laws in place that I feel can be amended to create an ecocide offence. Amending Section 40 of the Regulatory Reform Scotland Act 2014 would, I feel, work better. Because just because we are a parliament that can make new laws doesn't mean we should pass legislation. An important task we have as parliamentarians is to keep our legislation and laws up to date and relevant and keep things relatively simple. I am genuinely surprised that the Government have read the committee report and are choosing to ignore it and support this bill. If this passes stage 1 today, we will, as a committee, have to take more evidence, and there will be significant amendments that will be required. And we only have 21 sitting days of this session left. I'll give way to the member.
Monica Lennon.
I'm grateful to Douglas Lumsden. I'll declare an interest as a fellow committee member, although obviously recused from the scrutiny of the bill. I recognise, like other committees, the committee has a high workload, but does the member feel reassured from myself and the Cabinet Secretary that the work on the amendments has already started? The memorandum that the Cabinet Secretary sent to the committee in September set out the government thinking. I have been working on the bill for a very long time, and I will work rapidly to make sure that we've got, a small but streamlined set of amendments. Does he not put trust in me as one of his fellow committee members that I will not waste valuable parliamentary time, but will work to make sure that he can vote on a bill that his constituents in the North East of Scotland also support?
Douglas Lumsden.
I absolutely trust Monica Lennon that she wouldn't waste any parliamentary time, but there is deadlines and timescales that are set out in our standing orders that we have to respect. So, obviously the quicker the stage 2 amendments are lodged, the quicker we can start taking evidence on the impact of them. But with only 21 days left, I really feel that there's just too much that the committee is trying to do just now, and I don't think we'll be able to do this justice. Because when we're looking at the bill that would introduce unlimited fines and maximum penalty of 20 years in prison, I think as a parliament we have to get it right, and it has to be good law. And it's for this reason that, regrettably, I cannot support the bill at stage 1. It is I feel it's severely flawed, but no fault of the member when I say that. But the evidence during the committee evidence sessions have highlighted these flaws. So the best route, I feel, would be a review of the existing penalties carried out in the next session of Parliament, and hopefully we'll both be back in that session so we can get on with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Lumsden. I now call on Sarah Boyack to open on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also want to thank Monica Lennon for her work in bringing this bill forward. I know just how much work is required getting a bill to stage 1 in our Parliament. And I also want to thank the expert witnesses who gave evidence to the committee, to the stakeholders, to all of our parliamentary staff. And as members in the Chamber who've read the committee's stage 1 report will know, there were key issues that need to be considered in relation to the drafting of the bill and its potential impact. But this bill would create a new crime so that there would be consequences for intentional or reckless severe environmental destruction, with a court able to impose an unlimited fine, prison term of up to 20 years, a compensation order and a publicity order. And I think a key argument made by Monica Lennon was the fact that the EU Environmental Crime Directive will see EU states strengthening their legislation and increasing penalties. And it's vital that we don't fall behind other countries to send a clear message that ecocide is not acceptable. There were several key issues where the committee took evidence suggesting that we need a joined-up approach to Section 40 of the 2014 Act if the bill is to be passed, and I think that's key. There was a clear support for increased penalties, and I think the fact the Cabinet Secretary has been working with the member on key areas where the bill needs to be amended is really important. The Cabinet Secretary made an important point when she said in committee that she hoped the bill would never have to be used because it would have to be such a severe event. And the fact that we wouldn't want to have it using this legislation does not mean that we shouldn't have it in place, because the deterrent effect is important. And I think the comments made by witnesses to our committee that we needed an apex to our environmental crime legislation was absolutely right. I just want to flag, though, the key issue which has already been mentioned, that there's a striking lack of prosecutions and convictions under Section 40 of the 2014 Act. The points made by Professor Gemmell were that we shouldn't assume that the lack of a Section 40 prosecution does not mean a lack of environmental harm being caused, and his observation that the number of public complaints concerns have doubled while the number of prosecutions has significantly declined. So I think that needs to be considered. I apologise because I've got 4 minutes, Convener, with all respect. And I think that was really important because the potential deterrence impact would have to be backed up by guidance and training for those involved in reporting an instance and those involved in prosecutions. Now, that means more joined-up work and adequate resources for SEPA, for Environmental Standards Scotland, for Nature Scot, for COPS and the police. And I did agree with committee colleagues that the bill needs to be amended. I think the fact that there's already been work done is important between both the member moving this piece of legislation and the Cabinet Secretary. I think there were useful points made about joined-up thinking in the committee, for example, an alternative conviction provision to avoid a gap between existing legislation and new Ecocide legislation. I think the fact that we are already getting constructive discussions is really important for this committee. I think more guidance for regulators on the definition of ecocide, such as ecological criteria, scientific indicators and practical examples, is important because we need to make sure that those who genuinely exercise power and control in organisations are held to account, and issues such as contractors and subcontractor relationships need to be flagged at the next stage. I agree with the discussions about properly consented activities, and again, to address concerns from key sectors, it's not just amendments to the bill, it will be guidance from government. And I note that although the committee did not all agree we should progress to stage 2, I don't think we should kick it into touch. It will need work, but that's not an argument for us to vote it down today. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Boyer. I now call on Mark Ruskell to open on behalf of Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Monica Lennon for bringing forward Scotland's first ever ecocide legislation. I was delighted to be at the launch of our bill a couple of years ago in Edinburgh, and we both took time in Reykjavik at the Arctic Circle Assembly to meet international lawmakers who are really pushing for this change on a global basis. So, this really is truly a global green movement for change, and I think it reflects the fact that as a humanity, we are living through the Anthropocene, a period of lightning-fast destruction caused by just one species on this planet. So it is right that an offence of ecocide is reflected in law, and it should be a criminal offence of the highest order to intentionally destroy our environment, our common future. So I'm pleased that the Scottish Government have accepted that principle and want us to join the flotilla of countries who are embedding ecocide into their own domestic legislation. But the question of how we achieve it in Scotland in a way that dovetails with our existing laws is important. The Scottish Greens will be backing the general principles of the Ecocide Bill, but I am aware through the evidence we've taken in committee that there are major amendments that would be required if this bill is to pass stage 3 in the weeks ahead. Adopting an ecocide offence cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach across the world, and in Scotland our framework of environmental law is relatively well developed, stemming from our decades that we spent in the European Union. I believe an ecocide offence in Scotland does make sense, sitting at the apex of our legislation with the strongest penalties available where there has been severe, widespread, long-term environmental damage that has been intentionally caused. Now, Section 40 of the Regulatory Reform Act also provides a way for higher penalties to be issued for those who cause some of the worst forms of environmental harm. Increasing penalties under Section 40 would also provide a way to incorporate the principle of ecocide into Scots law and would align with the provision in the EU Environmental Crime Directive. Now, unlike some members, I don't see the provisions in this bill and an enhanced Section 40 as direct alternatives to each other. However, the committee heard from the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service about the challenges of pursuing a prosecution under ecocide compared to Section 40. And I think effectively the choices that prosecutors would face effectively trading off the lower likelihood of a successful prosecution with the severity of a maximum sentence and a higher burden of proof under this bill's version of Ecocide. So there does need to be clarity about how both options can exist and the way that prosecutors and juries would be able to navigate between the two. Now, I note the Cabinet Secretary's response last night to the committee. If there's time in hand, I will.
There's a bit of time. Edward Boynton.
Thank you, and I thank the member for taking an intervention. Given the concerns that you've raised, do you believe, like me, that it's really important we get any amendments in early if the bill is to proceed, so we can take evidence on them, so we know whether they're good or not?
Always through the chair, Mark Roscoe.
I would agree with the member and convener of the committee there. I mean, we almost are needing a form of an expedited process, not in terms of standing orders, but in terms of the evidence that's going to come to committee, the amendments, and also the views on the amendments. And I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be some late nights, I think. But it's been hard for this committee to really get its head around the breadth of this legislation. This is really challenging stuff that Monica Lennon's brought forward to this chamber. But we now at stage 2 and stage 3 really need to get our heads around whether there is a consensus on some key areas of the bill that needs to be changed. Now, as I said, I note the Cabinet Secretary's response to the committee that the opportunity for further reform of Section 40 is passed in this session. However, the Cabinet will be aware that my colleague Ross Greer did move amendments at stage 2 of the Natural Environment Bill to increase penalties under the RRA, and I'm sure this is an area that Green MSPs will want to return to in some form at stage 2, because we can't allow perpetrators of environmental crime, particularly those who have been reckless and have damaged the environment through neglect, to get away with ecocide, because the crime may be too difficult to prosecute under the measures that are in this bill. So, Presiding Officer, in closing, I will turn to some other aspects of the bill and the evidence, but I can reassure Monica Lennon that Scottish Green MSPs will be voting for a bill at stage 1 at decision time.
Thank you, Mr Roscoe. I now call on Liam Carter to open on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you. Can I join others in congratulating Monica Lennon on getting a bill to this stage, as I know only too well, irrespective of the complexity of the bill. It takes an awful lot of work, commitment and effort. So I really do congratulate her as a signatory of the bill. I think I very much echo the sentiments of the convener that this was a debate worth having. Needed to be having, and I again thank the NZEC committee for the work that they've carried out in allowing that debate to be had, in testing the evidence that's been received, and again put on record thanks to all those who have given evidence. I think the bill has highlighted the current legal landscape, identified the sorts of crimes that we mean when we talk about ecocides, and confirmed what appears to be a worrying lack of action to date in addressing those, and I'll turn to that shortly. But as again the convener acknowledged, the legislation aims to not just to punish but also to deter. There are issues contained within that, but I think that is a desirable dual purpose. The evidence to the committee showed broad support from stakeholders for the idea that instances of serious environmental harm ought to be dealt with through commensurate criminal penalties, and that's a view very much shared by Scottish Liberal Democrats. In that context, again, I note the evidence to the committee, including from the Crown Office, who suggested that in recent years existing legislative provisions have been sufficient in dealing with cases of serious environmental crime, while other legal and regulatory experts pointed to areas of the criminal law that could be applicable. And there's been already quite a bit of discussion around Section 40. But I find myself, I think, in agreement with what Mark Ruskell was saying, that I think one of the issues that will need to be teased out as this gets to stage 2, if indeed that's the case, is how that is going to work in practice in a way that doesn't overlap and doesn't end up actually creating the sorts of confusion that actually will work against the aims that we all want to see achieved. I don't underestimate the complexity of striking that balance, and I think, I find myself in some sympathy with the convener, not least from some of the interactions we've had within the convener's group around the work pressures on the committees at this stage in the Parliament. But I note the views of the Cabinet Secretary and the support of the Government at this stage, the confidence and the willingness of Monica Lennon as the member in charge to work at pace to try and address the issues that have been raised, I think, by all speakers to date. And on that basis, therefore, Scottish Liberal Democrats are prepared to support the bill at stage 1 to allow it to progress to that stage. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr MacArthur. We will now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of around 4 minutes. There's a small amount of time in hand at this point, but we'll see how that goes. And with that, I call Bill Kidd to be followed by Richard Leonard. Mr Kidd.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I'd like to begin by commending Monica Lennon for bringing this bill forward and for her tenacity in getting it to this stage. The word ecocide is from the Greek, meaning ecos, that's home, and side, meaning killing. So killing our home, aka planet Earth. Today, this issue could not be more pressing. In an era of accelerating climate breakdown, biodiversity loss and environmental injustice, doing everything we can to protect our environment, our planet, is not optional but essential. The modern understanding of ecocide is sadly rooted in real and devastating modern history. During the Vietnam War, as an active war, the USA sprayed more than 19 million gallons of a herbicide, Agent Orange, over South Vietnam to deliberately destroy crops and starve the so-called enemy, everybody. The results were devastating, affecting millions in Vietnam and also US veterans with cancers, birth defects and long-term ecological harm, forcing the world to confront and seek to define the crime of ecocide. This question has echoed through international law ever since. Despite numerous efforts to codify and legislate against the crime of ecocide, notably in the drafting of the Rome Statute of the ICC, getting it on the books seems to be very difficult for us. But the campaigns and momentum even, beg your pardon, for the formal recognition of the crime of ecocide have only grown since then, thanks in large part to the much-loved late Polly Higgins, Scottish barrister, author and inspirational environmental lobbyist and a good friend. Polly presented a definition of ecocide to the UN Law Commission in 2010, reading, "Ecocide is extensive loss, damage or destruction of ecosystems of given territories, such that the peaceful enjoyment of the inhabitants has been or will be severely diminished." It was this definition that Pope Francis referred to in his call for ecocide to become a crime in 2019. I'm sure when she looks down on us today, Polly will be proud of where her legacy is taking us. In 2024, the European Union adopted its revised Environmental Crime Directive, strengthening criminal sanctions for serious environmental harm. This directive has marked a significant step forward and lends weight to the argument that environmental accountability now has unprecedented political and legal support. The direction of travel is clear. The time to act is now, not tomorrow, not at some undefined point in the future, but now. And today Scotland can join this growing recognition. International examples reinforce that message. Kazakhstan adopted an ecocide law, and that followed the major environmental atrocities which took place there, including catastrophic damage linked to the destruction of the Aral Sea. Importantly, Kazakhstan is not alone. Belgium has now included ecocide within its criminal code, and beyond Europe, countries such as Brazil and Mexico are actively exploring similar legal approaches. Scotland will not be acting in isolation. We will be joining a growing global movement that recognises the need to protect ecosystems through strong and enforceable law. Closer to home, discussions on ecocide are also taking place within the United Kingdom. In 2023, Baroness Boycott, that's a real name, tabled a members' bill which sadly fell at the last UK election. Let that not happen here. Scotland has an opportunity to lead, to show ambition and to set a clear example of how environmental protection and justice can be embedded within our society. I understand that some concerns have been raised about implementation and enforcement, and that's reasonable. These concerns deserve serious consideration. However, I also note the Law Society of Scotland, whilst acknowledging overlap with Section 40 of the Regulatory Reforms Scotland Act, has also made clear that there is scope for adaptation, allowing this bill to sit within the existing framework without it being unduly complex or onerous, stating that the clear focus of the bill makes that possible. So I'm happy to speak in support of Ecocide Scotland here today and hope to promote the work of Polly Higgins going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kidd. I just would reiterate that there is at the moment a bit of time in hand, and hence I'm able to be a wee bit generous, but if that time gets used up, I will let you know. I call Richard Leonard to be followed by Elena Whittam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In the coming weeks, I will be leaving this Parliament for the very last time. When I was first elected 10 years ago, I vowed in coming here to leave the world better than when I found it. I'm not sure that I have done that, but Monica Lennon, who was first elected in that same election as me, in the same region as me, from the same party as me, in that time, I believe that she can say that she has made a difference, taking on period poverty and stigma, and now with this bill, taking on those guilty of causing severe environmental harm. It will make criminal accountability for intentional and reckless environmental destruction not a theoretical consideration, but a legislative reality. That's precisely what this Parliament was founded to do, to legislate, to act, to leave the world better than when we found it. So when I hear members of this Parliament or read of the British Association for Shooting and Conservation, the Gun Club, speculate on unintended consequences, I say to them, what about the deliberate, the calculated? What about the intended consequences of the willful polluters, of the species destroyers, of the nature wreckers? For me, this... yes?
Bob Doris.
I have no truck with the shooting lobby, but just as a member of this Parliament on the committee to scrutinise this bill, do you think it is right that we would scrutinise potential unintended consequences? Would that be our job as legislators?
Richard Leonard.
The point I'm making, Bob Doris, is that there has been talk in briefings we've received about unintended consequences. The overarching purpose of this bill is absolutely crystal clear, and that's why we should pass it at stage 1. For me, this modern question of ecocide is part of an old socialist tradition that goes all the way back to William Morris, whose concern for the natural world was integral to his philosophy of socialism. He warned a century and a half ago that commerce and the pursuit of profit would blacken rivers, hide the sun and poison the air, not least because of the unequal distribution of wealth and power, an inequality of power we still have to address. But for the avoidance of doubt, this Ecocide bill before us is not intrinsically anti-capitalist or anti-business or anti-development. It is simply about justice. It is about corporate accountability. This is about establishing a principle of absolute liability. But the whole point of this legislation is not that it will be a stick, it is that it will be a carrot to deter bad behaviour, that it will not be an incentive for judicial action, but a disincentive for criminal behaviour. So to those who are opposing this Ecocide bill, I'm bound to ask, which side are you on? Because you cannot be on the side of nature and conservation and the common good and be an ally of the polluter and the corporate criminal at the same time. Of course we need pro-action, not simply reaction. Of course we need prevention, not simply criminalisation. Of course we need global cooperation. But ecocide laws are being adopted across the world. We already know that much damage to our ecosystem is irreversible, that it is threshold dependent, that it can have a long gestation period, that when our ecology becomes overloaded over time, it snaps, which is why, in my view, this Ecocide law should rightfully address long-term harms which are cumulative. Let us all be clear as well that it is an additional law to existing laws, one which the Law Society recognises as distinctive, that it is needed. And when we are told that there haven't been many prosecutions under current law, like Section 40 of the Regulatory Reform Act, I say that just because there haven't been many prosecutions doesn't mean there haven't been many environmental crimes committed. So I welcome this proposed Ecocide law. I welcome it as a proportionate and as a dissuasive measure. It's a great privilege to speak in this debate this afternoon, because now is the time, now is the hour.
Thank you, Mr Leonard. I call Elena Whittam to be followed by Bob Doris. Ms Whittam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to speak today in support of the draft Ecocide bill, because at its heart this legislation is about justice. Justice for our environment, justice for our communities, and justice for future generations who will inherit the consequences of the choices we make today. And I thank the member in charge, Monica Lennon, for bringing this bill forward, and to the NZ Committee for their scrutiny. Too often, environmental harm is treated as an unfortunate side effect of progress, something to be managed after the damage is already done. But for many communities across Scotland, environmental harm is not abstract, and it is certainly not evenly shared. It shows up in polluted air, degraded land, contaminated water, and in the loss of local livelihoods and green spaces that people rely on for their health, their well-being and a sense of place. And that is why the Ecocide bill matters. It asks us to draw a clear moral and legal line that the large-scale destruction of our natural environment is not just regrettable, but absolutely unacceptable. And crucially, it recognises that environmental destruction is inseparable from social injustice. Communities that experience the worst environmental harms are often those that are already facing economic disadvantage, poor health outcomes and political marginalisation. Whether it is industrial pollution, extractive practices or reckless development, the costs are borne locally while the profits flow elsewhere. We just have to look at the devastating and lasting impact of the collapse of the coaling industry in my constituency of Carrickcomnick and Doon Valley that required upwards of £160 million of public money to restore. Not only did we lose the industry, we lost habitats and we lost species. This bill begins to rebalance that equation by placing responsibility where it belongs, on those who make the decisions that cause the severest of harms. Environmental justice is about more than protecting landscapes, it's also about protecting people. Clean air should not be a privilege. Safe water should not depend on your postcode. Access to a healthy environment should be a basic right and not a luxury. By establishing ecocide as a serious apex offence, this legislation strengthens the tools available to prevent harm before it happens, rather than asking communities to pick up the pieces afterwards. There's also a powerful message here about the kind of economy that we want to build. A just transition cannot be built upon environmental sacrificial zones or on the assumption that some communities are expendable. The Ecocide bill supports a future where economic activity is compatible with ecological limits and where innovation, investment and job creation are aligned with long-term well-being rather than short-term gain. For Scotland, this is also about leadership. We have often said that we want to be at the forefront of progressive environmental policy. This bill gives further substance to those ambitions by embedding accountability and prevention at the highest level of decision-making. It challenges all of us, government, business and public bodies alike, to act with care, foresight and responsibility. And as we've already heard, this actually will put us in line with other countries around the world who have introduced ecocide laws. Presiding Officer, the climate and nature crisis demand urgent action. They demand courage, clarity and a willingness to rethink the rules that have allowed environmental harm to persist for far too long. Supporting this draft bill is an opportunity to say that justice in Scotland means social justice and environmental justice together, not one at the expense of the other. Thankfully, incidences of ecocides are indeed rare, with estimates that it's something that only happens once in every 10 to 20 years, but the impact to our planet and to our people means that these incidences must be treated much graver than a simple regulatory breach. I urge members across this chamber to engage constructively with the bill, to listen to the communities who have long called for stronger protection, and to recognise that safeguarding our environment is safeguarding our shared future. We should support this at stage 1 and make it workable via early amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Whittam. And I call Bob Doris. Mr Doris.
Didn't realise I was next, presiding officer. Can I start by commending Monica Lennon on her efforts taking forward her Ecocide bill to get us to this stage this afternoon. As a member of the Net Zero Committee, I heard an impassioned plea from the member for an ecocide offence, which would create a new criminal offence for the most serious environmental harms. Various environmental organisations clearly agreed with Ms Lennon in relation to the need for that. However, I think it's also reasonable to acknowledge that much of the evidence in our committee heard suggestions legislation might not be required, or at least there was other ways of meeting those outcomes. For instance, we heard that existing legislation, particularly Section 40 of the Regulatory Reform Act, Scotland 2014, may be another method, potentially amended, maybe a more coordinated and a more obvious route to having a specific offence of ecocide. I still believe that is a distinct possibility. That said, the committee was also concerned there was a lack of prosecutions that would fall short of ecocide, depending on how it is defined, using current Section 40 provisions under the Regulatory Reform Act. Our committee wants to see a short, targeted review of these provisions, examining whether procedural, evidential or resource constraints, and I think Sarah Boyack was talking about resource constraints perhaps earlier on in her contribution, are limiting its effectiveness. Environmental offences under Section 40, and it's important to put this on the record, can see a fine of up to £40,000 or 5 years in prison, but it's not been used. But we shouldn't pretend that this bill will fill a gap so that environmental crimes in our communities will suddenly get a higher tariff. We have the powers just now to police and prosecute environmental crimes, but they're not happening. Therefore, environmental harm already has a criminal offence, one that could be added to take account of a more serious form of environmental damage. Indeed, the bill before us could see unlimited fines of up to 20 years in prison and up to 20 years in prison. And the threshold is much higher. Intent would have to be shown to cause environmental harm, and recklessness may have to be demonstrated also. Quite right, given the significant tariffs if a prosecution is successful. But one question is, of course, do we reform the Regulatory Reform Act following a review and legislate as required, or do we legislate now for this new standalone offence? It's a reasonable question to ask, but there's a wider question actually, which is why the heck has this place not done proper post-legislative scrutiny of the Regulatory Reform Act in the first place? I think that would have informed us in a much more substantial way ahead of considering this legislation. So, of course, we have to look at, is there a benefit to a standalone ecocide offence? There perhaps is some advantage. Some witnesses, including the member in charge as well, passionately believe that a standalone offence would offer a greater deterrent. Also talked about being at the apex of a suite of potential prosecutorial pathways. They also argued that the new offence may help us align with the revised EU Environmental Crime Directive. Amending Section 40, I should say, of the RRA could do the same thing. So you pay your money, you take your choice what the best pathway is to securing what we all want to see. The member referred to required amendments, and I think we all acknowledge that should this progress. The committee was concerned about the possibility of prosecutions taking place under an ecocide offence not succeeding. The threshold should be high. It is very high given the punishment that can be dispensed. Therefore, a prosecution may fail. That's a distinct possibility after we pass, if we pass this legislation. In such circumstances, obvious environmental offences may not be punished at all. The committee believe that a court or jury should be able to convict of the Section 40 offence of an ecocide prosecution. There should be a transferability between this new law, if it comes in, and Section 40. Drafting any such amendment will take consultation with the Crown Office and environmental regulators, and it will be required. The Crown Office described this as a possibility of double or quits. Do you go for the big prize of the big offence of ecocide, or do you go for something you can secure a conviction of? It shouldn't be either or. In concluding, presiding officer, I just want to say it's self-evident that there needs to be much heavy lifting done at stage 2 if this is to proceed over matters such as potential prosecutions on permitted activities, on planning consents, on concerns over liability, on cumulative harm, something I don't quite agree with Mr Leonard on, but I will agree to disagree in relation to some of that, and what severe actually means. What do we mean by widespread? What do we mean by long-term? This only... The
member is about to conclude.
I apologise, Mr Leonard, I can't take that intervention. I think the point I'm making in conclusion is that this is well-intentioned. It may have a positive impact, but stage 2 will take a lot of work to actually flush all of this out, and you have my goodwill, if not my absolute support here this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr Doris. We will now move to closing speeches. I call on Mark Ruskell to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you. And, I want to thank Monica Lennon and Bill Kidd for raising the legacy of Polly Higgins as well, who reminded us all that to protect nature, we must change the rules. And I think Eleanor Whittam also pointed to the chronic environmental injustice that many communities have faced in Scotland for generations. And that was seen in William Morris's day. He wrote very eloquently. He could see that injustice from the Industrial Revolution. And we're still dealing with a lot of that legacy here today. So it is important that we consider ecocide on a global basis, on a national basis. I think Bill Kidd is right to point to the need to embed this into international treaties. And, I would say what I see on my social media every day in Gaza constitutes ecocide, a systematic destruction of Palestine's environment. So these are bigger issues. I think in terms of what we have before us here this afternoon, I note that there has been widespread support for this bill, particularly from Scotland's environmental regulators, who would have to work with this. They'd have to work with this within the existing framework of environmental law and make sense of it. A number of members have raised Section 40 of the Regulatory Reform Act, and the question's been raised, why don't we have more prosecutions? I don't know. I don't know if it's because we're not seeing that level of environmental damage or because of the complexity and difficulties around bringing prosecutions under that measure. But I do agree with Bob Doris. This is an area where we really do need post-legislative review. And I think a short, targeted review, as the committee concluded, looking at whether this is to do with resource constraints or other problems, would be very important. And I guess what I'm looking for the Scottish Government to commit to at this point, even though we're very late on in the session, is that review to take place. And if that means, looking at the provisions of this bill, embedding something into this bill to require that review, I think that's something we should look at. We cannot ignore the legislation that we already have on the statute books. Now, a number of members have mentioned, including the Cabinet Secretary, their hope that there wouldn't be any ecocide prosecutions. I agree. I would hope that we would never have a prosecution for ecocide in Scotland. And I think this points to the power of this bill. It is a preventative bill. It is a deterrent bill. And I think Sarah Boyack spoke very strongly about that. I would have loved to have heard Sarah Boyack speak in the debate last week on my greyhound offences bill, which of course is also about providing a deterrent to harm, a deterrent to that damage. I think we've had some evidence in the committee about how having ecocide in legislation helps to change the culture within corporations. I would have liked to have heard more on that, and if Monica Lennon's got more evidence, it would be good to hear it. But I think we are starting to see more corporate voices, CEOs like Tessa Clark of Olio. We've had 6 Swedish multinational CEOs come together to say, look, we're the ones responsible here. We think that ecocide should be embedded into law. And I would like to hear more corporate voices, because when the corporate sector backs this as well, I think we're onto something. A number of members have talked about the need for a major change in this bill, and I think Monica Lennon has already acknowledged that, and that's around an exemption for those that already have a permit. We know that our existing system, habitats regulations, environmental assessment, is working. It is working within the licensing systems that we have. The government did bring forward powers to effectively allow a potential major change of those regulations through the Natural Environment Bill. That was stripped out of the bill. So, I feel confident that the systems that we have with Environmental Standards Scotland and others, gauging, reforming that licensing system, does give us a robust way to go forward, and that permitting, there should be a permit exemption within this bill. Presiding Officer, I know that I'm running out of time, but I think to go back to the point that the convener, Edward Mountain, raised with me, I do think it's important for Monica Lennon to come to the committee with some really clear, agreed positions on amendments with the Scottish Government. I'd like to see additional written evidence, reflection from the Crown Office, Procurator Fiscal Service, from regulators, from others. There is a danger that we run out of time here, but I'm confident, and I agree with Richard Lennon. I think Monica Lennon is going to leave Scotland in a better place at the end of this session where this bill gets through.
Thank you, Mr Roscoe. I now call on Katie Clark to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to close this debate on behalf of Scottish Labour and to thank our colleague Monica Lennon and her staff for all the work they have undertaken to bring forward this important bill. I also want to thank the committee members, clerks and all the stakeholders who have been involved in scrutinising this legislation ahead of Stage 1 and those who have campaigned for this legislation. Today, this Parliament is being given the opportunity to support the general principles of this bill and to take a clear stance in defence of our environment. We recently passed the Natural Environment Bill, which rightly set targets in relation to environmental protection. But these targets will be meaningless if they are not backed up by action. As members have made clear in today's debate, Ecocide is a serious threat to our environment, which we must act to prevent. Monica Lennon is correct to say that we must be more ambitious. Ecocide is the destruction of our natural environment by human beings through deliberate or negligent acts. We've already seen various examples of potential genocide internationally, from the use of chemical agents in warfare, mining, fracking, destructive fishing practices and the deforestation of the Amazon. In the UK also, we've seen many deliberate actions to harm our environment, even more recently, water companies who've been accused of illegally dumping sewage in our rivers and seas. This bill is a way in which we can begin to take more action to deter the environmental threat posed by Ecocide. As members have highlighted, it creates a new and specific criminal offence for intentional or reckless acts which cause severe environmental damage. We hope that it deters individuals and corporations from engaging in environmental harm through sanctions, including imprisonment for individuals, limitless fines for corporations, and empowering courts to seek compensation to address environmental damage. While Scotland would be the first nation in the UK to pioneer such an approach to deter ecocide, members have rightly noted that this bill would align Scotland with actions being taken by a number of other countries. Countries like France and Belgium have already passed their own legislation to address the threat posed by ecocide, whilst the Environmental Crime Directive requires member states to strengthen penalties for severe environmental harm. The committee made clear in its Stage 1 report that Scotland currently lacks a clear offence to reflect the consequences of deliberate or reckless environmental destruction. I understand that the committee did express some concerns, which members have spoken about in today's debate, around definitions and how this bill would interact with existing legislation. And I note that Monica Lennon has indicated that she's willing to work with the Scottish Government and other members to address some of these issues should the bill progress to Stage 2. And given the lack of time, I hope that work is undertaken. Scottish Labour is clear that the Parliament should agree with the general principles of this bill. We hope that this legislation will never be used and that it would act as a deterrent, but we also think it's important to have it in place in the event of serious destruction of the environment, in addition to current offences. A specific criminal offence to deter ecocide could serve as an important signal that Scotland is serious about environmental protection, and it adds to the environmental crimes which already exist. So I hope that we will pass this bill today, and that also it will lead to further discussion about what more we can do.
Thank you, Ms Pack. I now call on Maurice Golden to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I begin by congratulating Monica Lennon on bringing forward this bill. From personal experience, I know how much work and determination is required to get to stage 1. I also recognise the member's long-standing commitment to environmental protection, a commitment I share. This bill represents an opportunity to take decisive action to prevent and, where necessary, punish acts of serious environmental harm. Of course, there is already provision in law to address environmental damage. However, as early as 15 years ago in the SNP's manifesto of 2011, the SNP recognised that there was work to be done in this area, and they included a commitment to publish an options paper on an environmental court. Yet today we have Monica Lennon's bill to largely attempt to achieve something very similar to this. Because, of course, rights without any means of enforcement are truly useless. And as part of the United Kingdom, Scotland is bound by the United Nations Aarhus Convention, which requires that people must be able to challenge situations where their environmental rights are denied or environmental laws are broken. And I think this is a failure with the current environmental protections and associated legislation here in Scotland. I agree with the member, therefore, that the most serious cases should be treated as more than regulatory breaches. A standalone offence would place such acts firmly in the realm of criminal law. That matters because it sends a clear signal that environmental destruction is not a technical failure but a serious crime. It would also demonstrate that the Scottish Government expects businesses and the public alike to take environmental responsibility seriously. There is a growing international precedence for this approach. Belgium and France have introduced ecocide laws, the Netherlands is considering similar action, and the EU's Environmental Crime Directive requires member states to criminalise the destruction or damage of large or highly valued ecosystems and their habitats. Deputy Presiding Officer, as with any bill at an early stage, there are important issues to consider, including compatibility with the ECHR, the scope of liability, and the need for clear definitions to ensure legal certainty and effective enforcement. The last point is a decisive one. The majority view of the committee is that the bill should not progress, largely due to concerns that there is insufficient time to resolve the definitions. I have some sympathy with those members who dissented because Stage 2 would ordinarily be the appropriate point to test whether those concerns could be resolved. Instead, the committee recommends new legislation in the next parliamentary session. I must admit that this concerns me because it feels like kicking the can down the road. Remember the much hype and much delayed Circular Economy Bill, which ended up putting off meaningful action. Deputy Presiding Officer, this is a dilemma before us. The Parliament cannot credibly claim leadership on climate action if it repeatedly delays action. But with less than 2 months remaining in this session, we must also accept that rushed legislation is rarely good legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Golden. I now call on Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin to close on behalf of the Scottish Government. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'll try and keep my comments brief because I know that the member in charge will want to respond to the debate in full. And I've listened carefully to contributions to the debate, and I assure members that I'll be considering in detail the issues that were raised with the bill with my officials through the committee report, and indeed the many contributions today. I have to say it has been a fascinating debate. It's been very interesting to hear people's passion about this issue. It's been very interesting to hear people's takes on the proposals that Ms Lennon Lennon is putting forward as well. And I think it's actually been Parliament at its best. Even though we might not all agree on a lot of the issues, I think there is a general consensus that environmental crimes should be punished, and they should be punished in a way that deter any kind of environmental damage of whatever nature. Monica Lennon, I want to pay tribute to Monica Lennon in raising the profile of the importance of preventing that serious damage. It's great that we're having this debate, and I don't want to kick the can down the road. I think that Monica Lennon has... I will in a second, convener. I want to... Monica Lennon has brought to this Parliament a global campaign that is already happening. We're not going to be front runners here. There are already countries, and it's been mentioned by many, which countries have already taken this stance. And I'll take the convener.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention. We have 7 meetings left of the committee. We've already asked for another one. We've got 3 meetings that involve the climate change plan. We've got 2 meetings that are already allocated. Therefore, if this bill is going to go further, the Cabinet Secretary must lay her amendments in the next week or so to allow us to schedule the evidence. Is the Cabinet Secretary in a position to do that, Presiding Officer?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, actually, I can actually tell you, and I have actually already said the nature of the amendments that we will want to lay. We want to replace the legal or persuasive burden and the defence of necessity and expressly evidential burden. We want to remove the reporting requirement. We want to add a defence of acting under a permit and other authorisation. And I have said repeatedly that we have been working on amendments for this bill. So forgive me, I'm not going to put anything on record and constrain myself to time, but I do appreciate the constraints that the committee is under. I was in that situation myself as a convener when we were exiting the EU and we had all the statutory instruments coming through at the end of the last Parliament and the climate change plan. So I completely understand the constraints. I mean, many people have said in this debate, that they hope that this, if it comes to its conclusion and if it passes and goes through Parliament, is a law that will never have to be used in court. And I think that we all, the severity of what we're talking about is something that has to be avoided as well. I have indicated that I am considering other amendments appropriate to respond to the concerns raised by local authorities and possibly linking the new offence to the existing Section 40 offence, and taking on some of the considerations that people had mentioned about the very high bar of ecocide and the reticence that there might be by complainants in going too high up the chain for fear of it not reaching that high bar and then not being applicable in a Section 30 Regulatory Reform Act offence. And I think that's something that I talked about in stage 1. However, I will leave the Parliament to decide how they want to proceed, but certainly the Government remains... I'm just about to sit down, Ms Boyack. The Government remains supportive of the general principles at stage 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I now call on Monica Lennon, the member in charge, to wind up the debate. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to thank all colleagues for their contributions today. It's clear that members have put a lot of thought into the points they wanted to make today. And I do, again, I'll repeat what I said at the beginning, I do take seriously the committee's report. I'm grateful to the committee for its work, and I do understand the time constraints on everyone's work in the Parliament as we find ourselves in February ahead of an election. However, we have to make every minute in the Parliament count. And I want to again reassure Edward Mountain, the convener, and all colleagues that work is well underway to identify the areas for amendment, the areas where we do agree, myself and the Government, and the points that have been made in the committee's recommendations. I am genuinely looking at all of those points to see where amendments are appropriate. I will work at pace, not in a rush, not like a headless chicken, but work in a serious, committed way to get this done. And I give Parliament my word on that, because I agree with Maurice Golden and other colleagues that it is too important to kick down the roads. And the Cabinet Secretary is right. It's not about Scotland trying to show off that we're the front runner, because we're not. We are lagging behind our neighbours in the European Union. The issue was raised in the House of Commons just this week. where ministers are looking at this across portfolios, justice, DEFRA, because as Bill Kidd said, there was a bill in the House of Lords. I can assure him that Baroness Rosie Boycott is a real person, and she spent her, a bit maybe like Russell Findlay, who's not here today, but as a journalist, investigating powerful, wealthy people, holding them to account, and working with colleagues from all benches in the House of Lords and people of no political persuasion. Yes, of course.
Maurice Golden.
I thank the member for giving way. Does the member agree with me that there's precedent set actually in the last session of Parliament with the Tide Pubs Bill, which had, I think from memory, around 247 amendments and was to be taken in stage 2 in March, and the committee worked hard to ensure that all those amendments could be dispensed and it could move to stage 3. So what is the timescale facing the member is something that this Parliament has experienced before and indeed has dealt with before.
Monica Lennon.
Yeah, look, as a socialist, I always have a glass that is half full. I believe we can get this done. I will move mountains to get this done. And I have great faith in Edward Mountain, even though he's maybe talking himself down today. But as a convener, he expertly chairs the committee every Tuesday morning. And I'm looking at the colleagues who are here. We can do this because, as Douglas Lumsden said, and I think he's flirting with the idea of supporting this, it matters to the people of the North East of Scotland. It matters to my constituents. It matters to all of us. So there are technical points that we have to deal with. I do understand the frustration and the curiosity about Section 14. Why have there not been any prosecutions? Colleagues have raised concerns about, do we have the right resources in place for our regulators, including SEPA? So I hope that the bill has allowed that debate to really open up. And I want to thank Bill Kidd for mentioning Polly Higgins, and I want to mention colleagues who brought tears to my eye, including Richard Leonard. I can't take people being nice to me. I'm not used to it. But I want to reassure colleagues that this is not about being sentimental and just, oh, Scotland trying to, get headlines. We are now one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. We all love Scotland. We all care about Scotland's future, but we cannot be complacent any longer. And I know that some colleagues asked the Cabinet Secretary in committee when she was giving evidence, what if it puts off investment? What if people don't want to come to Scotland because we have an Ecocide law? Well, I want people to know that we will have an Ecocide law. We welcome investment, we want development, we need it to be in the right place and done in the right way, and I have a great trust in our planning authorities to do that. But people need to know, well, Maurice Golden's given me a look. My husband's a planner, so I have to say that. But, planning is where I learned about protecting our environment. And, I do believe that we need to recognise that planners already look at environmental impact. But the point I want to make in closing is the amendments that we've already set out in writing that we agree on, we can work at pace. I'm listening to all of the committee members, but it's up to the committee to agree the time to do this. I will be working, with an open door to everybody. And if we kick this down the road, we are doing a great disservice to our constituents today, but to future generations. That's why it's not just environmentalists backing the bill, it's health charities like Asthma and Lung UK, it's the Children and Young People's Commissioner, because they know that our young people need to have a safer, healthier Scotland. So I will end there, Presiding Officer, and I want to thank the Scottish Government, thank all members who are backing the bill, and to those who are not yet convinced because are worried about the time, then please give the bill a chance, and I assure you I will work night and day to make sure that we have a robust bill at the end of the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. That concludes the debate on the Ecocide Scotland Bill at stage 1, and there will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.